The girl boss versus the trad wife. This is a major battle that we've been seeing online lately. And it's a debate that doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. So is this a useful debate? Which team should we choose? Is there one that's better than the other? That's what we're going to discuss today. And I'll spoil it right off the bat. I find this girl boss versus trad wife argument to be so stupid. I honestly find it to be very silly. I get really annoyed with this debate. I do. We're starting to see it everywhere. It's all over TikTok. A lot of these women's digital magazines now are talking about girl boss versus trad wife. And I find this battle to be tired and unproductive. And I think it turns women and mothers into caricatures, both ends of the extreme. I think it just turns women into these sort of fetishized versions of themselves. So if you're new here, welcome to The Shift, a podcast where we talk about building healthy, whole women, especially for building stronger families and a thriving society. I find this topic to be especially important because I believe that most are meant to be wives and mothers. If you're not new here, you know I've talked about that many times. I think that we should be encouraging more young women to prepare for marriage and motherhood, not only for their own individual good, but for the good of society. And this girl boss versus trad wife debate, I don't think it's turning more women towards marriage and motherhood, even when it's argued from the quote trad wife side. Because that's a really big trend now. You get online, you see all the reels, all the influencers who are self-proclaimed trad wives. It's not like a title that's been slapped on them. For example, Ballerina Farm, that article in the Sunday Times, they called her the queen of the trad wife. But Ballerina Farm, Hannah has never called herself a trad wife. In fact, she's always been very upfront and forthright about the fact that she is a working mom. Yeah, she has 8 kids, but she also runs a business and she is out working the fields and the farm, milking cows. She's selling stuff online. She's obviously got an illustrious influencer career, and she's a beauty pageant winner. She's not a self-proclaimed trad wife. So that's not really who I'm referring to. People have identified her as like the queen of the trad wife trend, but she's not even trad. I'm talking more about the popular influencers who intentionally call themselves trad wives. They're like, this is the trad wife corner of the internet, and we're going to talk about trad things. I don't think that the argument, even from the trad wife side, is necessarily turning a lot of young women towards marriage and motherhood. I think it's more attractive to women who are currently mothers, and maybe they like it as sort of escapist content. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But I think it appeals maybe more to millennials or even Gen X women who are scrolling online and they're like, oh, that's so cute. Look at the homesteaders and trad wife stuff. I don't think that the girl boss versus trad wife argument is helping any young women like Gen Z girls turn to marriage and motherhood. I just don't think it is. But first, let's talk about the girl boss trend. This is a popular term, an image that was sold to millennial women probably hardcore starting in the early 2000s. You can see it clearly in various rom-coms, TV shows, featuring career women who are rising in the ranks of their office, and they were wearing the pantsuits and they were beautiful and going out for cocktails and they were going to board meetings. You know, movies like The Devil Wears Prada, 27 Dresses, shows like Sex and the City. Of course, that was a major show where women were focused a lot on their career, like Miranda especially, right? And these were all stuff that were coming out in the early 2000s. And the term girl boss epitomized the idea of female empowerment in the corporate world. And it was spearheaded by figures like Sophia Amoruso of Nasty Gal. And the girl boss ethos really promoted resilience and confidence and the pursuit of success. And it was encapsulated by the likes of Sheryl Sandberg and her book called Lean In. I think it was like Lean In, Women Work, and something else, like something about leading, women work and the will to lead, maybe. And this philosophy inspired a generation of millennial women to become entrepreneurs and become really dedicated first and foremost to their career above all else. And you see a lot of these companies like Spanx, 23andMe, ClassPass, another company called Away, like very famously female-led companies that have sure produced great products, but it was also just as much about the fact that it was female-led. And it's still in our culture today. A lot of times you get online to purchase something and on their website, it's like women-owned, women-led. And personally, I could not care less if the owner and founder of the company that I'm buying from is a woman. One day I was like a health food shop and I was in the freezer section and there was ice cream that was labeled women owned, like a big label on it. It was like a big deal. It was like a whole little tiny section of the freezer that's women owned. I'm like, I could not care less if the ice cream that I'm buying is owned by a woman. I couldn't care less. But a lot of this is carried on from the girl boss trend. And of course, the girl boss narrative wasn't without critique. You know, I think that even on Netflix, there was a whole show called Girl Boss, and it was loosely related on the Nasty Gal girls, Emma Russo's life. And it shows this relentless pursuit of professional success. But I think what we've seen recently in Gen Z, a lot on TikTok, is there's a significant cultural pivot where a lot of these younger women, unlike their predecessors, more like my generation, I'm a millennial, these young women don't idolize the hustle culture because that's what it was for a long time. It was hustle culture at the expense of your own physical and mental health. And I've done content before about why women are not as designed for the 9-to-5 grind as men are. And it can even come down to your hormonal cycle. You have a roughly 28-day hormonal cycle. Men have a 24-hour hormonal cycle. They are the same hormonally, physiologically every single day from morning to night. It's the same. Women were very different throughout the month. And of course, there's many other reasons why women just are not really cut out for the corporate masculine world the same way that men are. I had my friend Alex Feinberg on the show recently, and he worked at a hedge fund, worked at Google, and we were discussing about how the heavy hitters who are female in these types of industries, they're either pretty masculine or they're just downright lesbian, because it's really hard to make it in these masculine driven circles if you're not masculine. So as a woman, if you're trying to maintain your femininity, it's very hard to do that if you are really into hustle culture. But Gen Z is starting to really move away from this. I think that they're questioning the sustainability and the mental cost of maintaining this lifestyle, which is leading to a broader cultural reassessment of what ambition and success really mean for women. You're seeing this. I think there was a trend on TikTok called Quit Talk, where a lot of these younger individuals celebrated leaving their toxic corporate jobs, which is it's a stark contrast to the girl boss trend. There's definitely something interesting happening here. I know Gen Z definitely tends to be more politically liberal for sure, but a lot of times I see Gen Z and I'm hopeful because there is definitely a bit of a rebellion happening against the birth control pill, for example. You're seeing a lot of young women who are coming forward and they're like, I want to ovulate because I'm realizing it's good for my health. I'm throwing away the pill after taking it for several years. I feel better than ever. My mental health is better. I feel more attracted to men, blah, blah, blah. And you see a lot of these women coming forward and they're like, hey, young girl, like Gen Z girls, they're like, don't do hookup culture. It's not good for you. It harms you in the end. It just benefits men. And then same thing when it comes to the girl boss culture. You're seeing a lot of these young Gen Z TikTokers come forward and they're like, hey, actually, it's not really healthy, ladies, for you to grind 9 to 5, usually many more hours than that, every single day, every day of the year like men do. It's not good for your hormonal cycle. It's not good for your mental health. So there's something happening here. And I like seeing that. I think it's a good thing for Gen Z to ask critical questions about some of the trends that millennials have left behind for them. And then it brings us to the other extreme, the trad wife. This is a major Instagram aesthetic right now. It's the ultimate aesthetic on Instagram these days. It's the newest cosplay that's actually a sort of fetishization of the 1950s picture perfect housewife who vacuumed in her pearls and bought the newest version of the refrigerator and dishwasher. And let's take a moment to discuss, first of all, the sliver in history, the 1950s, because that's what the trad wife trend is really based on. It's not based on the tradition that came before the 1950s. So Obviously, the term trad, when we're talking about trad wife, is short for traditional, but the trad wife image that we see in today's social media trend is not truly traditional. It just refers to the small anomaly of the 1950s, which is actually a sliver of history that is very, very, very different from the role that wives and mothers played in previous generations and throughout most of history. The 1950s was this unique post-war period where the suburban life was growing rapidly, following, of course, the industrialization sprawl of the early 1900s, where people were encouraged to move away from the farm, move away from the agricultural life and move into the city, get the new jobs, make more money, separate from your extended family so you could find more success. And the 1950s, remember, was a unique time in the economy because we were trying to rebuild from the war. And there was a huge push for new technology, so-called technology in the home, like washer machines, dishwashers, laundry machines, new refrigerators. For example, that movie, Mona Lisa Smile, I've referenced it before in my show. It had strong feminist undertones. However, there was one thing, there are a few things that the movie got right, but there was definitely one thing that stuck with me that they really got right, is when the scene when Julia Roberts is showing the ads of wifehood. She's showing all of these marketing ads to try to sell these appliances and these products. And it's the images of the wives vacuuming in pearls, wearing the perfect dress, having their hair done perfectly, preparing for dinner parties and stuff. And her message partly was that this is a capitalist marketing scheme that is sold to you by these major companies and corporations. And she's right about that, because in many ways that 1950s idyllic picture perfect housewife, it was really a part of this marketing scheme by these companies to sell these new products that were on the market. And it came, of course, with the perfect image of the family that they were intentionally trying to create post-war. Come join the best women's health experience online today. My women's health group called The Shift is a wonderful online community of hundreds of women who are dedicated to improving their health and their wellness. In my group, you get access to so many different things that are going to help you improve your health, whether you want to lose weight, balance your hormones, improve your fertility, whatever it might be. Every month, we do a different health challenge in my group. Sometimes we do fitness challenges. Sometimes we do meal prep challenges. Sometimes we do challenges for balancing your hormones. And there's always something new to work on. So we're constantly moving forward together. I also offer recipes and weekly workouts in the group. And there's so many webinars and interviews and exclusive podcast episodes with guests where we can talk about an array of topics that aren't really allowed to be talked about online, like on YouTube. I've got interviews with holistic OBGYNs, holistic practitioners, frequency medicine doctors, nutritionists, doulas, everything that you might be looking for. And of course, we talk about health from a holistic perspective. We talk about marriage, motherhood, and we're able to share a lot more information in there that we might not necessarily be able to share online on YouTube. So go to the link in the description in the show notes and join The Shift, my women's health group. It's at a really affordable price. We've got so much going on there, and I have additional programs and weight loss programs in there if you're looking for something additional. So join us. We've got hundreds of supportive women who are on the same path to improve their health and their lifestyle, and we'll see you inside The Shift. They were trying to rebuild like the American family unit uniquely as a nuclear family unit, which is very different than what our ancestors had seen for a long time. So this era of wifehood was strongly influenced by capitalist efforts, as was the whole concept of the individualized nuclear family. Because remember, prior to the early 1900s, it was very, very common for families to live either with each other or very close to each other and function in these strong family units. And I've argued many times before, and I will take this to my grave, I'll die on this hill. I honestly think the breakdown of the extended family was one of the first moments that we saw American culture start to break down. Because when you break down the family unit, which is more than just mom, dad, and kids, or more than just husband and wife, that's when you allow for a tyrannical government to influence the family and individuals. That's when you allow a toxic culture to seep in. That's when you see more children sent off to public school to be brainwashed by government doctrine. And that's when you see divorce rates increase. I really think that when we adopted this hyper individualized version of family, motherhood, and wifehood, that's when American culture really started to decline, and a lot of things happened from there. I've talked about this many times on previous episodes. You can go back. I think actually the very first episode I ever did on my solo podcast was dedicated to the trad wife. So you can go back and watch that. I could go on about this forever, but the context of this is important as I talk about how shallow I think the trad wife trend is. This is not an attack on the women who get online and call themselves trad. I'm not attacking anybody in particular. I just think that when you take the bird's eye view and you really look at what's happening culturally, this trad wife trend is more of it's more of a yearning for simpler times, which I can understand that. I can understand the motive many times of where this comes from, because in this rapidly changing culture where we have lost a lot of tradition, of course, I'll acknowledge that. A lot of people are yearning for simpler times where mom did stay home with their kids and daddy used to go to work and mommy used to bake pies and be there for the young children and breastfeed the kids and raise them. And there wasn't a nanny and there wasn't two parents just like grinding at the office every day, 9 to 5. And the mom cooked and made a pot roast and the husband came home and they had a lovely family dinner. I think a lot of people are yearning for those simpler times, even if they can't articulate that. And I get that. And I also get that social media will always be a place of escapism for people. It's where people go to look at perfect, beautiful photos and videos of beautiful people doing interesting things, doing things that they wish they could do, things that they aspire to do, but deep down they know they're never going to actually do. And that's kind of what the trad wife trend has become. It's become a caricature of frolicking in the fields and wearing sundresses and milking cows and baking sourdough every day and wearing a floral dress and smiling when your husband comes home. And if you've ever listened to my show before, you know I'm a huge fan of marriage and motherhood. And I actually think we should encourage more women to yearn for a life of marriage and motherhood because it's better for everyone. But I just find the trad wife trend to be an extreme social media aesthetic rather than a realistic, honest, authentic way to encourage women to be healthy, whole versions of themselves and eventually healthy, whole versions of mothers and wives. Because, and I say this as somebody, like I probably check off a lot of the trad boxes. I quit my job to be home with my kids. I pack lunch for my husband every single day. I bake sourdough all the time. I have a batch of sourdough rising right now downstairs in the kitchen. I do all the laundry. I do all the cooking and cleaning. By many of the trad wife metrics, I check off the boxes. And yet I still find this trad wife aesthetic to fall short in many ways, not in just a few ways. I just find it to be very unhelpful and unproductive, especially when you're trying to compare it to the girl boss thing, because there is so much more to motherhood than wearing a dress and cooking everything from scratch, which by the way is what I do. Like I make really good gummy bears for my kids. For my daughter, I don't let her eat the gummy bears that have the food coloring in it. Of course, I make gummy bears. It's really easy. You just get gelatin, pureed fruit, a little bit of fruit juice. My favorite is the mango orange one. So I just puree like a cup of mango, some orange juice. I forgot what else I put in there. A little bit of honey, and then you mix it with gelatin and you put it in the molds, you put it in the fridge, and it's ready in 10 minutes. I digress. But even though I pass all of these trad wife tests, I still find the trad wife thing annoying. But that's because in my heart, what I long for, what I want more than anything else for our society is for young women not to fall for the propaganda and nonsense that I fell for, which is that marriage and motherhood suck the life out of you and it ruins your life and it ruins your body and it'll only bring you despair. It'll ruin your dreams, because I did fall for all that once. I went to college, I went to grad school, and I went to Harvard, and I was caught up in the woke intersectional mob before it was even a thing. In 2011, I was in graduate school and I knew a they, them. 2011. I'm sure that in 2011, most of you listening did not even know that pronouns and the gender thing was a thing. But I was in grad school at Harvard, and that was the stuff that I was exposed to early on. I was writing content on intersectional feminism. Like I fell for that for a while in my 20s. I did. And in my heart, I just really want women to not fall for that, because marriage and motherhood is one of the best things you can do, not only for yourself, but for society. And I truly want more young women to be attracted to marriage and motherhood. But furthermore, I want them to do marriage and motherhood successfully. because I think one of the problems that we're seeing in our culture right now, a lot of it comes from the right, is they treat marriage and motherhood as the destination. Getting married and having kids is the destination. It's not. It's just the beginning. And so if we are simply telling women, get married and have kids as young as possible, as if that's the goal, I don't think that's right, because it's just the start. It's much more important to prepare young women to approach marriage and motherhood in a healthy way so that your marriage lasts, because what good is your marriage if it doesn't last? And so that you raise your children the right way, because what good is motherhood if you don't raise your kids the right way? And I think it's much more important to prep women for that than it is to tell them to just get married and have kids as young as possible, no matter what, because your eggs are going to dry up or you're going to hit the wall. Okay, well, what are we doing to prepare the women for marriage? That's something that I seriously see lacking. I don't see that enough. I think it's much more important to think about the quality of marriage and motherhood than to think about the quantity of it. And I know that the trad wife trend right now, it's very closely related to ideas of homesteading, having multiple kids, having as many kids as possible, getting married young. There's nothing wrong with those things. And it's fine if you want to do all those things. But let's be honest here. Let's be honest. The majority of women don't want to homestead, don't want to milk cows, don't want to have 8 kids, and don't want to get married at 22. Right? Women listening to this, especially if you're younger than I am I right? I don't think that that's what you necessarily want with motherhood and marriage. I'll be honest, it's not what I want. It's not what I want. I don't want to live on a farm. I'm happy with my suburban life. I'm sorry, I am. And you know what? The vast majority of moms live a life very similar to mine. We live in the suburbs. We have access to like the greatest technology. I'm not saying you don't on a farm, but you get what I'm saying. Like, we live in these more concentrated areas where we take our kids to play dates. There's options for good schools if we want it. And I don't want to have 8 to 10 kids. I just don't. And I know that sort of kicks me out of the crunchy mom club that is the trad wife group right now online. But I would venture to guess that most of the women listening to this also don't want to have 8 to 10 kids. I've got 2. I'm really happy with 2. Maybe we'll have more. Who knows what God's plans are for us, but I would be very happy with 2. And I know plenty of young women who want to become moms, but they don't want to have like 5, 7, 10 kids. They're happy with a few. And I think that it's okay to acknowledge that. And I think we actually have to acknowledge that. It was going to be this hard. I didn't know it was going to be like this. Not that it's bad. It's just that it's a lot. And she was like, I was not prepared. And she's a great mother. She is totally present and there for her son. And it's amazing to see how she and many other women have stepped up to motherhood. But the truth is, it takes a lot to prepare for it. And just getting pregnant and having the baby, that's not the end of the journey. It is just the beginning. It's day one. And I think we should be focusing more on preparing young women for that in real, honest, authentic ways. And I know that social media is the place for extremes. I know that. I'm not blind to that. I'm not, immune to that. I understand that it's sort of the place where aesthetics are born and we can't take everything there totally seriously, and we should take it with a grain of salt. However, I do know that social media and our culture play a really big role in how teenagers and young people develop values and thoughts about life. And I think it's time for us to reclaim the beauty of family and motherhood in a way that's real, to not only attract more young women to it, but to prepare them for it. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to encourage more in-person communication and community, because we are a hyper online culture right now. And I think a lot of women, they have almost been programmed to believe that the only sort of community they're going to find is something that's online. And we have seen the significant decline of church life, the significant decline of church community. And that has, of course, resulted in a lot of people feeling isolated and a lot of women feeling lonely and not feeling like they have much support. And I think that you have to have that in-person support to be a successful wife and mother. The one supplement that everybody should be taking, regardless of what stage you are in life, is organ meat. Organ meat capsules like these pack a huge punch for nutrition, electrolytes, minerals. They're so good for cardiovascular health, your lymphatic systems, your cognitive function. Ladies, it's even good for your hormones and your fertility. This Bison trifecta here has all three. It's got the liver, the heart, and the kidney, and it comes from grass-fed and grass-finished bison, which is known as one of the most nutrient-dense animals on the planet. And you can use my code GINA10 for 10% off any and all orders. This is a wonderful product. I take this every single day. I've taken it through my pregnancy, taken it through postpartum phases, and it's so good to support a healthy, active lifestyle. It's known as nature's vitamin. So use my code GINA10 for 10% off. You can go to the link in my show notes to get yours today. And for me, I always say this on my show, it starts in the church. And I've never had better support than I've had from church friends in our church family. I would highly recommend that you find an Orthodox parish in your town, in your local community, because it will, of course, first and foremost, introduce you to Christ and the gospel and his church that he left for us. And then it will, of course, secondly, introduce you to a community that will support you. And wives and mothers need that more than anything else, more than they need the self-care, more than they need therapy, more than they need the parades for women's rights. All of the things that our culture tells us that we need to be empowered women and empowered wives and mothers, that's like last on the list, if it's on the list at all. What you really need is motherhood and marriage that is centered around Christ and centered around the church and church community. And if you're listening to my show and if you're not Christian, you may not have been expecting to hear that. And I get that, that's okay. But if you're new here, you should know that pretty much everything that I talk about on this show is Christ-centered. It comes at it from a Christian perspective because I believe that's going to save the West. I believe it's going to save the family unit first and foremost. And like I've said many times, my politics are the American Christian family. Those are my politics. That's what I want everything to support. That's what I want all of our politicians to support through their policy and everything that they do. I want it, the center of everything we do, to be the American Christian family. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a ton of kids. Like if you are somebody who is maybe struggling with infertility, like your family can be you and your husband. That's a family. That's fine. But I want everything to be centered around the family. And for me, that family is incomplete without Christ. And I think that's why so many women are actually struggling with motherhood and family, because it's not Christ-centered. I saw this viral Instagram video. I'm going to cover it in an entirely different episode because there's so much more to say, but I'll just kind of preview it. This woman got on, and I looked on her page, and apparently she does a lot of content about sobriety, motherhood, and mental health. And she said that motherhood is not fulfilling. She said it's very unsatisfying. And she said motherhood is 90% of trying to convince your kids to eat the food that you cooked them, getting your kids to clean up after their mess, doing all of these mundane, tiring, tedious tasks. She says motherhood is not satisfying the way that they said it was. And the very first thing that popped into my head was, of course it's not satisfying when you approach motherhood and family from a secular point of view. When you approach it from a materialist, secular point of view, motherhood is purely exhausting and draining. And that's because you don't have the perspective of motherhood being ascetic. It is a service. It is a spiritual service, a gift, a duty that we have been given that is so much bigger than us, that will last long after you die and last even after your children die, because it will be passed down, the influence that you had on your family. And I know that's something that we can't like quantify, and that's not something that science can prove because we're obsessed with science, our culture. But the way that you raise your kids will have major effects on the following generations of your family. And it will even have effects on your community and society as a whole. But when you approach motherhood without Christ at the center, it becomes this very tedious, materialistic, secular, dull, lifeless task. And I can actually understand that. If you do not have the spiritual component that really drives the fulfillment of motherhood, it becomes a very boring, draining, what's the word I'm looking for? Not lifeless, but like a cold situation. And I'm going to talk about that more in the next episode that I do, but it's just, and that's why when I see a lot of these videos of people talking about motherhood regret and they don't like motherhood, it's unfulfilling, it's tiring, it sucks, it made me leave my career. I'm not surprised. I feel bad for these women, but I'm not surprised because they have approached motherhood in a secular way, just like our society has taught them to. And that's how you arrive at the feminist idea of motherhood draining your resources, draining your body, killing your dreams and your soul, of course. So I think that we need to focus more on motherhood and wifehood as a community-based event, as it should be approached with Christ at the center. And that in and of itself would save a lot of women the misery that they experience with motherhood. So yeah, going back to the girl boss versus trad wife, I just think these two extremes, they're not helpful. I think that women should be focusing more on building healthy, whole versions of themselves. And you know what? I'm sorry to say this to a lot of the trad wives online, but the happiest, most fulfilled mothers that I know, they are mothers primarily first and foremost, but they have additional hobbies and sometimes even side businesses that they invest some time into. And they are whole versions of themselves. I'm not saying that you have to do this. I'm not saying that you have to work on the side to be a mom. No, of course not. But I'm saying that choosing one of these extremes over the other is not really a lasting recipe for happiness and fulfillment in motherhood, because the happiest mothers I know have rejected both of these extremes. And I'm so sick and tired of hearing people arguing whether girl boss or trad wife is better. The memes online, the memes are so annoying. I'm so over this shit. What is it? I think it's like the trad wife. There's a term for her. She wears like the blue sundress and her boobs are like ginormous. And she's looking at the white, I think it's the Chad meme guy. And she's like, oh my gosh, you would let me quit my job and work 3 jobs just so I can breastfeed our kids and live on a farm? And he's like, yes. And I'm like, what is this? It's such an extreme caricature. It's not even reflective of what real motherhood and family life is like. So I would like to retire. Can we officially retire girl boss versus trad wife? I'm not a fan of the girl boss. Definitely not. It has resulted in a lot of women chasing a career and chasing a professional life that has left them 35 years old, desperately attempting things like egg retrieval and IVF because they're realizing that they waited too long to start a family. But then the other side is a trad wife that is honestly, I think, repelling many of the younger women. I think it is. And there is a much better option, and that is Christian motherhood with Christ at the center. It's much more whole, holistic, fulfilling, and it doesn't reduce you to an extreme caricature. I'll discuss more in my next episode about motherhood being unsatisfying. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into how important it is to be spiritually healthy to be a mother. It's very important to have a spiritual health when you're taking care of little kids and taking care of your husband, taking care of a family. So thanks for listening, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Please share it, and please support the show by purchasing any of the products from our amazing sponsors. We got a lot of great stuff happening here on the show and a lot of good stuff coming up. So if there are any topics that you want me to talk about next time, leave it in the comment section. Thank you all. See you next time. Bye.